Hi everyone, I'm Steve and this is College Support Network. In the past, I've worked in high schools as a college advisor, and I also have experiences with college financial aid, academic advising, as well as admissions. In today's video, I'll be talking about the SAT test. Specifically, I want to talk about things such as a brief history of the test, how to register for it, a breakdown of the actual test, how you could study for it, who actually needs to take the test, and lastly, just some quick test day tips for you all. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. So what is the SAT and what does it stand for? The SAT was first created and debuted by the College Board in 1916, and originally it was known as the Scholastic Aptitude Test. Over the years, it's gone through a couple different name changes. It went from Scholastic Aptitude Test to Scholastic Assessment Test, and then from that to SAT 1 Reasoning Test, and then from there just SAT Reasoning Test, and then after that, as we know it as today, just the SAT. What's interesting is that every time it went through a name change, the test itself changed a little bit as well. However, to put it most simply, the SAT was just a way for colleges to see if students were ready for college or not. And to this day, it's the most widely used standardized test for college admissions. Another fun fact about the SAT is that when it was originally debuted in 1916, it was actually designed not to match what you learned, and it was designed not to align with what you learned in high schools. However, like I mentioned earlier, the test has gone through a lot of different changes throughout the years. Even up until recently in 2016, the test was changed to more align with what you learned in high school, as well as get you ready for what you might be seeing once you get into college. And full disclosure, even though the SAT is the most widely standardized test used today for college readiness and college admissions, there is a lot of criticisms about its fairness as well as its effectiveness for college admissions. For example, many people and even many educators claim that the SAT is racially and financially biased. I won't go too much into that in this video, however, I just wanted to make a quick note of that just for you all to be aware of. With all that being said, the SAT is still widely used throughout the United States, and there really aren't that many alternatives. So, how do you actually register for the SAT exam? To register for the SAT exam, you have two different options. One option is registering by mail, which is a lot less popular these days. And for students that are planning to take the test in summer or fall of 2020, or if you're even planning on taking it just during pandemic or COVID times, this option may not be available for you anymore just because College Board has blocked it for some states. So definitely make sure to check to see if that option is available for you. The second or more popular way is by registering via online. To register online is actually very simple. All you really need to do is go onto the College Board website and look up SAT registration. I'll leave a link to the actual page and the actual registration down below in the description box. And as always, I'll leave links to everything I talk about in this video, as well as different articles and links that you might find useful in the description box below. Whether you register online or via mail, there are a couple different things that you need to remember before registering. The first is you'll have to provide both personal and as well as academic information. For personal information, you'll usually have to put things such as your name, address, parents' information, date of birth, and things like that. And for the academic profile portion, you'll have to list things such as your current high school, your current GPA, courses that you've taken, as well as the grades that you received in those courses. Some other things they also ask for is colleges that you might be interested in the future. And two other things to remember when registering for the SAT is that you'll actually have to choose a specific test date as well as a test center for the test. There are also registration deadlines for the test dates that you might be interested in, so definitely make sure to check the calendar first so you don't register for a test that you might have to incur late fees for. Like I mentioned before, I'll leave a link to the test dates as well as registration deadlines for you. And before you finish registration, you will definitely have to pay for the test, unless of course you're given an SAT fee waiver. For students that don't have the fee waiver and are applying for the 2020 to 2021 academic year, you will have to pay $52 for the regular standard SAT exam and $68 for the SAT exam plus the optional essay. I'll speak more about the optional essay later in this video, but just a quick heads up. If you're wondering if you're eligible for the fee waiver or not, I'll leave the information on the screen now regarding the eligibility as well as the criteria for the fee waivers. So now let's talk about the SAT test itself. As I mentioned before, the SAT is meant to test you on two things. The first is what you learned in high school, and the second is what you need to succeed in college. Recently in 2016, College Board also made some pretty fundamental changes to the exam itself. Specifically, the changes aim to put an emphasis on the use of evidence to support answers, a shift away from obscure vocabulary to words that students are more likely to use and encounter in college as well as in their careers, a math section that is focused on fewer areas, a return to the 1600 point score scale, an optional essay, and lastly, the addition of rights-only scoring. So you might be wondering what right-only scoring is. Basically, it just means that you won't be penalized for any wrong answers that you may put down. So if you don't know an answer, always just guess. The entire test is 3 hours long, or 3 hours and 50 minutes if you're doing the optional essay as well. However, you will be given breaks throughout the day. Now I'll briefly go over a quick breakdown of the SAT exam itself. The full SAT exam with the optional essay is broken into 3 different sections. The first portion is the evidence-based reading and writing section, which is scored between 200 to 800 points. This section is obviously broken up into 2 different subsections, the first being the reading subsection. It focuses on reading and vocabulary in context. So for the most part, you'll be reading different stories and passages and then answering questions from there. What's important here is for students to really understand the complex passages that they're reading and then being able to identify as well as define the vocabulary in the context. The next subsection is the writing subsection, which is 35 minutes long and has 44 total questions. For the most part, this section really focuses on grammar and the usage of grammar. The next main section is the math section, which is also scored between 200 and 800 points. The entire math portion of the SAT exam is 80 minutes long and has a total of 55 questions. However, this portion can be broken down into 2 different subsections. The first is the 55-minute calculator optional section, and then the second is the 25-minute no calculator section. To do well in the math section, you should really focus on things such as the heart of algebra, problem solving and data analysis, passport to advanced math, and additional topics such as geometry, trigonometry, as well as pre-calculus. And for the last portion of the full SAT exam, there will be an optional essay. The essay portion is 50 minutes long, however it is not scored together with the other 2 sections that I mentioned earlier. The essay itself is scored a little bit differently from the other 2 sections as well. For the essay, you'll have 2 different people read and score your essay, and each scorer will give it between 1 to 4 points in each different dimension that they use, such as reading, analysis, and writing. And then the 2 scores for each dimension are added together. For the actual essay, you'll receive 3 different scores. 1 for each of the dimensions, and then they range from 2 to 8 points. One thing to note here is that the SAT essay does not have a composite score, so that means they don't add the 3 dimensions together. Each dimension is actually looked at independently of one another and given their own score, obviously. So a quick summary of the full SAT exam and optional essay that I just mentioned. It is going to be around 3 hours and 50 minutes long, with a total of 154 questions, plus the essay that you may have to write. The total score is going to be on a 600 point scale with up to 800 points in the math section and then up to 800 points in the evidence-based reading and writing section. It's really important for students to study and do well in both sections if they want a really good score. So now you might be wondering, okay, how do I study or how do I get a good score? That's a great question. So to preface this section and just to talk about the entire video in general, this is a very surface level / overview of everything that I'm talking about, right? So if you want something that's more in-depth, such as a more in-depth version of how to study for the SAT exam, or if you want a full walkthrough of how to register for the SAT exam, definitely leave a comment below. It's something that I'm really interested in doing, but I'm not sure if you all want to see that or not. So like I said, if you have interest, feel free to comment that below. So how to study for the SAT exam? The very first thing I would recommend students to do is to take the PSAT. Basically, the PSAT stands for the Preliminary SAT Exam. And to put it even more simply, it's just the practice SAT exam that you take before you take the real test. The official PSAT can only be taken once per year, and students usually take it in their sophomore and junior years. One cool and interesting fact about the PSAT is that for students that do exceptionally well on that exam, you'll actually be eligible for the National Merit Scholarship, which basically gives merit scholarships to students that did well on the PSAT. Similar to the real SAT, the PSAT will test you on things such as math, reading, and writing. However, it is a little bit shorter at 2 hours and 45 minutes, and it's actually not out of 1600 like the regular SAT. It's actually out of 1520, which is, to me, kind of a weird score, but that's neither here nor there. And the next way you should study for the SAT exam is by taking a look at Khan Academy. Honestly, Khan Academy is one of the best websites ever for learning things in general, and I think it's super underrated. It basically got me through college, which is funny to say. However, for the purpose of this video, students should really use it for SAT related things. One of the most underrated functions of Khan Academy is that if you've taken the PSAT before, or you've taken the official SAT before, Khan Academy is actually linked to College Board, so your official test scores from the PSAT and the SAT will automatically be uploaded onto that website. And then from here, Khan Academy can actually tell you specific things that you need to focus on to get a better score. To me, Khan Academy has 3 different reasons why it's a really good option for students to use to study for the SAT. The first is that it's really personalized to you. Like I said, if you've taken the SAT or the PSAT in the past, all your information will be uploaded onto Khan Academy, and then you'll get a personalized game plan or just a study plan so you can know what to focus on and how to get a better score in the future. The next reason is because Khan Academy and College Board actually have an official partnership with one another. That means when you use Khan Academy, you'll actually have access to the 8 full-length real practice exams that have content that was created by College Board itself. And the last reason why Khan Academy is really useful, at least to me, is that it's really interactive. They have thousands of practice exams, videos, lessons, hints, and even other different study and test taking tips and strategies that students can use to really succeed and do well on the test. The next way you can study is by using past or old official SAT exams. A couple different tips for using old practice exams is that you really should take the very first one just cold turkey. This means taking it without studying at all, just because I think this really reflects what you really need to study on after you take the test. So if you don't study and you just take the exam, you'll know what areas you really need to focus on after. This means that you'll be able to study smarter because you'll only be focusing on the areas that you really need to work on. The next tip for using old or past exams is that you should really take them as close to real testing conditions as possible. So what does this actually mean? To me, I think students should try to take these exams at the same time and date that they plan on taking the actual exam. Another thing you should do is really not use your phone and turn off all the electronics that you have in your room and just take it as if you were taking the real test. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but there's actually a lot of research and studies that back that students that study in test conditions actually end up doing a lot better on the test when they take it. And the last tip for using old or past exams is just use it as a guide. You don't have to always take it as if you're taking an actual SAT exam. You can just study the areas that you know you need help on and then just focus on those. I think this is a good way to study for the SAT just because a lot of the times if you're taking the test for the first time, the vocabulary that they use or the way they ask the questions are pretty confusing. So having experience reading the questions beforehand, even if it's just practice, can be really helpful. And the last way of studying for the SAT, which is a little bit less self-learning and more actual help, is by maybe contacting a private tutor or contacting your local high school to see if they provide any high school tutors or even any SAT prep that you can sign up for. Obviously, this is going to be very personalized to you. Every student has their own situation. I know some high schools don't provide high school tutors or SAT prep. So definitely contact your college and career center or your local guidance counselor to see if they will be able to provide you with anything. So now let's talk about, do you need to take the SAT or who should even take it? So for students that are planning on going to a 4-year university, it's probably in your best interest to take the SAT or even the ACT because these campuses usually require students to have one of these tests on file to be eligible to apply to the campus. However, like I mentioned a lot in previous videos, it's really important for you to do your own research to see what campuses are asking for of you and which campuses are obviously asking for an SAT or an ACT exam. Additionally, for students that are planning on going to a 4-year university and feel like maybe your GPA is a little bit low, or maybe you feel like your ECs or extracurriculars are a little bit lacking, or like just in general, you feel like your general application is not as strong, the SAT or ACT can definitely make up for that if you score well. Well, quick note for CSU students or students that want to go to a CSU, the essay for the SAT is definitely optional. However, it's something that I would recommend students to do anyway, just because when I'm working as a college advisor, I had a lot of students that knew for sure that they were going to a CSU and they opted not to do the essay portion. However, when college admissions or college application season came along, they decided they wanted to go to some private schools or apply to some UCs, and then they had to scramble to take the SAT again with the essay just because they didn't do it in the past. So like I said, if you're just on the fence, or even if you know for sure you're going to a CSU, I would still recommend taking the essay portion. For community college students, you actually aren't required to have the SAT, ACT, or even just any entrance exam on file to register or apply to a community college. However, similar to the CSUs, I would recommend students to just take the exam anyway. And the reason for this is because doing well on the SAT or any entrance exam will actually allow you to waive out of the introductory courses in your first couple of semesters. That means you can actually transfer quicker or get your certificate or associate's degree quicker if you do well on the SAT exam. To elaborate, the last couple of years, community colleges have actually been using your high school grades as well as your score on the SAT exam or ACT or another entrance exam to waive you out of courses in science, math, English, and so on. So if you do well, you might not have to start with the lowest level of math or the lowest level of science. And then if you need these classes to graduate or transfer, you will be waived out of them, so you'll actually be able to get out quicker. Lastly, doing well on the SAT could actually make you eligible for a lot of different scholarships. Some universities will provide you with a merit-based scholarship if you did exceptionally well on the SAT or any other entrance exam. Similarly, private organizations and companies will also provide merit-based scholarships for students that did exceptionally well or performed exceptionally well on the SAT or ACT or another entrance exam. I know you've been hearing a lot of SAT or ACT or SAT versus ACT in this video. If you're interested in learning more about the ACT and if it's right for you, definitely subscribe because I'll be doing a video on that next. I'll also be doing a video in the future regarding the SAT versus ACT, and in those videos I'll be going over things such as which one you should study for, which one is a better option for you, what the differences are between the two, and so on. So like I said, subscribe if you haven't done so already. And the last thing I want to go over today is just some test day tips that students should be aware of before they take the test. The first is what you should actually bring to the SAT exam. First and foremost, students should be wearing a face covering or a face mask if you're taking this test during pandemic/COVID times. Other than that, here are a couple of different things that you should bring. Your admissions ticket, because obviously you won't be able to take this test if you don't have it with you. The next is an acceptable photo ID. College Board has a couple different criteria for what an acceptable ID is. In general, your ID has to be valid and it has to be a government issued ID or issued by the school that you currently attend. It also has to be original and a physical document, so you can't bring any photocopied or electronic versions of it. It also has to have your full and legal name, and it has to show up exactly the way it does on your admissions ticket. Next, it has to be a recent and recognizable photograph that clearly matches both your appearance on the test day and the photo of your admissions ticket. Lastly, it just has to be in good condition. This means that they should be able to read your full name as well as be able to recognize you in the photo. The next thing you should bring is 2 No. 2 pencils and an eraser. And when I say an eraser, I mean a huge eraser because there's going to be a lot of erasing on this test. The last thing I really recommend students to bring is an improved calculator, obviously for the math section. Similar to photo IDs, College Board has a lot of different criteria for what approved is. I'll leave some information on the screen now, as well as some links below for you to really see and understand what approved calculator means. Next, I want to talk about some nice things that you should possibly bring, but it's not really a requirement. The first is a watch. This is really useful for you to track how much time you have left and to see how much time has passed. One quick note about the watch is make sure you don't have the alarm on, or make sure you don't have an alarm at all. Just because the SAT and College Board is really strict about alarms going off during your test, I believe they'll actually cancel your score and cancel the test for you if your alarm goes off. So make sure, if you do bring a watch, make sure to have that handled. Next is a bag or a backpack of just essential things such as snacks, drinks, and anything else that you want to carry that is safe for test day, obviously. Like I mentioned before, the test is going to be 3 hours and 50 minutes long if you're doing the full exam with the optional essay. So you want to have things such as snacks and drinks on your rest breaks. And the last nice thing to have, which isn't really a requirement like I said or not necessary, is to have extra batteries for your calculator. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but if your calculator dies during the test and you're in a part where you really need a calculator, it might be useful for you to carry those extra batteries just because it can help you score better in the long run. Obviously, you'll want to let the test moderators and the test people know that you have them with you and if you'll need them or not. And with all that being said, I just want to leave you all with one key piece of advice or one key tip for the actual test day. And that is, really remember that the SAT exam is right scoring only. That means you won't get negatively impacted for any wrong answers that you have. So if you're really stuck on a question or you know for sure that you don't know it, it's always better to guess because you won't be marked negatively because of it. So you'll always be able to get a higher score if you guess, but you won't get points knocked off if you guess wrong. Okay everyone, so that's the video for today. Like I mentioned earlier in the video already, I know that this is a very surface level or basic level of the SAT and some of the sections that I mentioned, such as how to register for the SAT exam, how to study, and the SAT exam itself. If you're interested in learning more or you want a more in-depth version of some of the sections I covered today, definitely leave a comment below. I love making videos like this, but I don't want to make it if it's not a huge interest to you all. But like I said, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and spending it with me learning about college. I think that's super awesome. As always, thumbs if you learned and subs if you loved. Take care, y'all.